afternoon, everyone. Again, Pete Calabrese. This is Ahmed M, and we have Anibal Sanchez. We're here to talk a little bit about the world of immigration and more specifically the EB-5 program. That's what General Focus is for a group of us here. The EB-5 program is an investment-based visa in which an investor would come in. They would make a risk-based investment into a qualifying project, in which case they would get fully vetted by USCIS, and ultimately, once their investment has created 10 new U.S. jobs, they would be able to get their full and unconditional green card. There's a lot goes along with the program, and I think it's an important tool that all of you could potentially look at for yourselves, for your business, as you look at potentially sourcing out your staff and providing them options as to pathways to stay and to give themselves some more permanent and security in terms of their immigration status in the U.S. So I'm going to jump right in with Ahmed and have him talk a little bit about the current immigration regime, the climate under this administration, and what he's seeing out there right now.
Thanks, Pete. Hi, everyone. My name is Ahmed. I'm the VP of the Middle East and South Asia region for CanAm Investor Services. Like Pete mentioned, as you guys are growing and scaling your companies and looking for employees, and maybe even yourself as a founder, immigration is a hot topic issue in today's world, especially in the U.S. A lot of, my parents were immigrants, and a lot of people here, they started with H-1Bs or F-1s or whatnot and had that opportunity. So where do we stand today? Obviously, our wonderful leader and president, Mr. Trump, has made things a little bit harder in recent years than they were before. Extreme vetting seems to be the policy these days. And with that comes a little bit of changes as far as how things are adjudicated at USCIS, which is the governing body. H-1Bs have become harder than ever before to obtain. The L-1 visa is looking less and less like a viable option for companies looking to transfer employees across the sea. And there's not a lot of alternatives out there. So the real thing that I want to touch on today is wait times. There are some options out there that are viable, but what do those wait times start to look like, right? And I was lucky enough to actually attend the Invest in America USA Advocacy Conference in DC this week, and we got to hear from Charles Oppenheim, who's the head of visa control at the Department of State. And so he gave us a little bit more insight into what kind of wait times we're looking for. The EB-2 category, which is for master's degree holders that are looking for employment-based immigration, the wait time that he listed was close to 30 years, which increased kind of dramatically from the numbers that we had previously seen of 15 to 20. And then EB-3, which is one rung lower on the employment base for graduates at the undergraduate level, he said 50 years. And you could hear an audible gasp from people in the room. So it's taking a lifetime to get your green card in the U.S., and you're locked into kind of the career and employer that you've started with, which is making things very difficult. So the other option out there that a lot of people have been kind of looking at is employment-based 5, which is actually an investor visa, which is what we're talking about today. And the wait times for that as well. As the program has become more and more successful, more and more popular, we're seeing longer and longer wait times. Now, most of the world has no wait time. You're going to apply and you're going to get your green card within about 2 years. But China is looking at about a 15-year wait. India and Vietnam are now looking at, in the worst case scenario, about 8 years, and in kind of the best case scenario, which we're pretty optimistic that that's actually the realistic scenario, is 5 years. And if you have any questions about what those timelines are, why those numbers are so different, I'm really happy to talk to you afterwards and explain. But there's a lot of math that goes into it. There's a lot of assumptions that he's making. We know for a fact that 8 is the worst possible scenario, but for those of us who have been in the industry and see the numbers on a day-to-day basis, we're much more realistic about what numbers we can expect. And 5 years seems a lot less of an issue when you're talking about your ability to work and live and grow a life in the U.S. as opposed to the 50 that a lot of people are kind of facing in today's world.
Thanks, Ahmed. So Anibal, I'd like to take it over to you just from the legal standpoint of this. Ahmed had touched upon a couple different visa categories that might be options. If you could just speak on that a little bit and maybe just what some of the roadblocks are, some of the challenges it might be in looking to move forward in that sort of category.
Sure. So at Darren Silver and Associates, we represent a wide variety of immigration applicants. We represent multinational corporations, Fortune 500 companies, individual investors, and of course, employees of those companies here in the US. And a consistent conversation that I have in my practice with HR professionals, individual clients, and investors that want to come to the US is why is it so hard now compared to what things look like 2 years ago, 3 years ago? As Ahmed touched upon, extreme vetting is here and it's real. I have clients that leave the United States to obtain visas that have gone through this process on multiple occasions, and suddenly they are flagged and are in their home countries for the next 6 to 12 months, waiting for the government to complete their application processes. And unfortunately, in the cloud of secrecy that we live in, it's unclear exactly why that's occurring. So, generally speaking, I deal with many H-1B applicants, L1s. Many of you may be familiar with those types of visa categories. And essentially what's been happening is most of those people eventually want to obtain their permanent residency here in the United States. And it's just taking decades to have that happen for them. Even L1s for multinational executives are now taking years. And during that time, these individuals have to travel, they have to obtain visas. It's not an easy conversation to have with the CEO of a $2 billion a year revenue company and let him know that he needs to sit in Europe for approximately 2 to 3 weeks while the government deals with their visa processing. There's constant need to travel, there's constant need to have easy access to the United States, to locations around the world, and a green card is obviously one of the best, I mean, it is the end game for many of these individuals. So essentially, what many people start to look at is what's going to be the easiest path for me moving forward. For some, the traditional employment-based green card is going to be a reasonable path, but again, if you are a citizen of China or India or any of these other countries that have extreme backlogs, the EB-5 starts becoming an extremely viable option, primarily because it is relatively stable in the way in which the government reviews these applications. There's certainty in terms of what the requirements are. There are no real there's no chatter within the government within that category about making America great again, America first when it comes to investing money into the United States. Unlike in employment-based cases where you have this undercurrent of why are these jobs not going to US workers? Let's try and make things a little harder for these individuals and these companies that want to employ these individuals. With an EB-5, you have a reasonable and credible way to move through the immigration process without having that undercurrent of, let's look at this extremely closely.
Great. So I'd like to talk you through a little bit of how, since EB-5 is really the focus of, especially myself and Ahmed, we work at a broker-dealer that is wholly owned by the parent company, which provides EB-5 investments, CanAm Enterprises. So it brings us to some of the different counterparties that are involved in an EB-5 transaction. We mentioned the regional center. The regional center is the one that's going to be structuring that deal under the EB-5 program. We mentioned the attorney, like Anibal. Anibal would be helping you as a potential investor to fill out your petitions, to move forward with it that way, and to completely document your source of funds, a point that we'll touch upon again in a second. And a third party that would be involved in it would be the broker-dealer. So I run our broker-dealer at CanAm Enterprises, and even though an EB-5 investment is a very unconventional security, it is still in fact a security, meaning that in order to put an investor into that, we need to make sure that we're doing due diligence on the project, making sure it's suitable for the investment, and that that investor has the investment the investment experience and meets certain criteria, such as being an accredited investor, to move forward with that investment. So once you now have those parties identified and you're ready to move forward, the steps of an EB5 investment are fairly straightforward. You would choose your regional center, and you would choose the project that they have that you're interested in, and choose your immigration attorney. They would move forward with your first petition, which is called your I-526 petition. That is your petition for a conditional green card. Now, the only condition on that green card is the time frame. It is a 2-year green card. Once you get approved on the I-526 petition, you would begin your conditional permanent residency period. It's a 2-year period. 21 months into that, you would file what's called an I-829 petition, and that is the petition to have the conditions removed from that green card. That is the point at which you would need to prove that your investment created the requisite 10 jobs in order to remove those conditions. Now, while that petition is pending, you are able to stay here on that initial conditional green card and get an annual renewal of that green card. The second component of your green card is the financial portion of it. We structure our projects as a loan, meaning that when the loan closes, when the borrower starts drawing down, your loan term begins. When that loan term ends, you would be able to get your funds repaid back to you, assuming that you have now met your at-risk provision. The at-risk provision ends once you have completed that conditional permanent residency period, that 2-year period that I talked about. So it sounds like a lot, but really there are very defined steps that go along with it, and they're pretty straightforward. The most important part of it, though, is to take a step back to the beginning, is that initial part where you're going to get your conditional green card and where you're proving your legal source of funds. So I'd like to talk to Anibal a little bit about this from the legal perspective. Just what sorts of things go into this source of funds documentation, and just how in-depth does it really go?
It goes extremely in-depth. So, I really do not like having conversations with my clients when they tell me, well, I've, made significant money over my life, and I invested that money, and now I have $500,000 to invest into this program, and it's in a bank account in Singapore that I've held for about a decade. And then I respond, great, so can you give me your last 10 years of tax returns, and can you please give me your bank statements for the past 5 years to prove that the money that you claim came from earnings, in fact, was deposited into that bank account. My clients tend to chuckle when I ask them for that information, because they just find it hard to believe that the U.S. government actually would want to see this kind of documentation, but in fact they do. So generally speaking, what we start to look at are alternatives. So you can use a loan secured by an asset to fund your investment. You can receive gifts. Thankfully, many of my clients have family members that are extremely generous and are more than happy to give them a gift, in which case they will have to show where that gift money came from. We have business owners that take shareholder loans. So there's a wide variety of ways in which these investments can be funded. And generally speaking, they have to be well documented. You have to prove to the U.S. government in this current environment that there's no money laundering involved, there's no illegal gains that are being used for these transactions. It always kind of shocks me that the U.S. government wants to see this on paper, since dealing with the government, I know that they have access to way more information than I could even think of providing to them via these documents. But that's kind of what the process is now. And generally speaking, though, our success rate is extremely high, again, because the government is very formulaic in the way in which they look at these applications. There's certainty in the way in which they want these applications presented. So once you've done a fair amount of them, you generally are going to know these are the types of documents that you need to demonstrate to prove a reasonable source of funds.
I just want to jump in here and, kind of summarize what we just all heard, because a lot of information just came at you, and, I really want the walk away from this to be, look, the immigration landscape that we're currently dealing with today in 2019 is very, very difficult. As you're staffing your teams, as maybe you are looking to found a company here in the U.S., one of the challenges you're going to face is, how do I get work authorization? How do I remain here for the time that's necessary, right? And EB-5 is one of the best options to do that. Now, from Pete gave you a really good insight as to, the project side of things, that there's many parties involved here that are structuring deals for you. Overarchingly, you need to invest $500,000 currently. We expect that number to go up as, things continue to, the price of everything continues to rise, including bread and EB-5 investments, right? And then on the other side, Anibal gave you some insight as well on just what the process is for you as an investor, right? Or how you can get the money that's necessary to make the investment. And, I think that one of the really big things that I want everyone to walk away from here is, this is an option, but it just takes planning, right? You have to talk to the right people, make sure that you're doing all the steps necessary, not skipping over anything, and it really does become a viable option after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're running low on time here, so I'd like to open it up to any questions if anyone has. Sure.
The question is, does the $500,000 have to come from overseas, or can they be local money for a potential immigrant?
Your money can come from anywhere. Mm-hmm. There's no restriction on where the money is coming from. Now, there's a lot more nuanced issues as far as whose money it is before it's invested. But yeah, the money can come from the U.S., it can come from abroad. There's no restriction on that.
As long as it's
a
legally
specific situation where I have a 15-year employee, a vice president who's worked for the company under H-1B, still waiting on green card, and I'm sure he's got $500,000 sitting in the bank account in U.S.
Right.
Can that be used for EB-5?
Yeah, so let's talk afterwards. It's a specific case, but yes, I mean, essentially that's what a lot of our investors look like, is people who've been waiting for too long, have the savings, and are willing to kind of accelerate their timeline. So yeah, let's chat afterwards, but that sounds like exactly the case.
Thank you.
Does it have to be from a single person? Can it be a combination of two investors giving the 500K? Or 2-3 people doing the same investment?
So the way it would work is there would be a primary applicant on the petition, and when that applicant moves forward, they would be able to, at the consulate stage, determine their spouse and all of their children that are under the age of 21, and they would be eligible to come along with them and receive a visa as well. So it would be there for that immediate family, but that would be the extent of it.
Yeah, so if your source can come from multiple people, your application can only include your family members, children under 21, and your spouse. But yes, I think the first part of your question was, can the money come from a couple of different sources? Yeah, that's very, very common. And I think Anibal mentioned that you can get a gift even as part of your investment from a close family member or someone that you have a relationship with. Just yell it at us, we'll figure it out.
Can it also be part of the founder's salary?
You want to?
The 500K?
The question is, can it also be part of the founder's salary? Yes, it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. So all you have to prove is that the money comes from a lawful source. It doesn't matter what that source is.
I want to tell a funny story because this is just something that we've experienced. I was a former immigration attorney myself, and so to illustrate just how wild some of these sources of funds can be, we had cases from investors in Vietnam. And Vietnam is a cash economy. Banks don't really hold deposits there because of a historical mistrust for the banks. So people often will go out and purchase gold for their savings, right? And they'll literally have trunks of gold. And we had an investor who sent us their source of funding documentation, and they said, well, back in '91, I bought a chest of gold. And I was like, okay, great, can you prove that? And he sent me a picture of the chest of gold. And believe it or not, we got that approved. But yeah, so there's a lot of situations. I would really say that talk to an attorney who's experienced in source of funds, like Anibal, who has seen everything under the sun that you can imagine, including pictures of chests of gold, and can really walk you through the different options that are available to you in your specific situation. Any other
My
questions?
question relates to retrogression, vis-a-vis India in particular. So can you give us some idea of what that retrogression period vis-a-vis India would apply? Assuming if I'm an applicant today as against, let's say, last year, April, what kind of timelines do we look at?
Sure.
So no, go ahead. Man. You talked about this at the IUSA conference.
Right. So I think that your question is, what kind of timeline are we looking at for someone who's of Indian nationality for retrogression if they maybe filed last year? Is that correct? Yeah. So retrogression right now, what the new numbers are is basically if you filed today, there'd be something like a 3 to 5 year delay in your application from when it's approved to when you actually get the green card in your hand. For someone who filed last year, that number is drastically different. It's anywhere from a year and a half to maybe 3 years max of a delay between when they filed and when they can get the green card in their hand. They even, Charles Oppenheim even noted that the priority date that would come out for an Indian national when the retrogression hits would be either mid to late 2018. So it seems like the bulk of the filings for Indian nationals kind of came towards the end of last year, and that's really when the delay is going to kind of start. So if they filed mid last year, they're actually in pretty good shape to not even really face too much of a delay, maybe a few months even is possible.
One of the biggest issues for startups, right, that have very limited resources is to keep their talent. One of the biggest questions is that you have people who just finished schools, they're on their OPT. Is that besides H1B, which throws them into the lottery, or putting up $500,000 to keep these people around, are there other avenues? When I was at NASA, for instance, there was a L1, which was for scientists of exceptional ability. Is there anything like that to keep the talents where they're really, really critical to a startup to keep them around? For instance, making him a co-founder, something like that.
So, unfortunately, there's no getting around the visa backlogs. No matter what the importance is of your role here in the United States. So the immigration process is essentially a two-step process. So you submit a petition to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That petition process could be expedited based on the importance of an individual's role in their company or to the U.S. economy. But once that petition is approved, now you're facing a backlog of a visa, and there is no legislative mechanism available to circumvent that wait time. So, for example, an EB-2 national interest waiver, you may be able to get that processed with immigration officials in a matter of months, but now you're in the same boat as other EB-2 nationals that are waiting for a visa number to become available, and now you're looking at decades if you're a citizen of India or China. EB-1, multinational executives, the same thing. Not decades, but you're looking at years. And the challenge that I have found with my clients that are multinational executives is they just need to travel, and they just need to have certainty. And now there's all these moving parts regarding employment, regarding the businesses abroad that have to remain active, and it starts to become a challenge for everyone when you are just kind of sitting and waiting and you have no real certainty as to what exactly the future holds.
And I think you touched on, with your question, one of the key issues, right, is if you're a founder or you're an employee of a startup, it's very important for you to be a part of the company and to be able to work in the U.S. while you're here. And what Anibal is really highlighting here is that you might even be approved, but the timeline is just not going to be in the same area of what you need for your company. And you're right. There are other options like the L1As and the L1Bs or whatnot. But as we've seen, I mean, those programs were abused for so long. People have used them to open up gas stations and stuff like that. And that's just not what a company was supposed to be for. And so they're no longer viable options. The government looks at these, and almost unless you're we're coming from like a Fortune 500 company, and L1 is at this point going to be denied or RFI'd to oblivion, more or less, unfortunately. I think that's all the time we have for today, right?
So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I hope this is helpful. If you'd like to talk, we have a booth. If you want to grab us outside here, we'd be happy to talk a little bit more about any questions you guys may have. And thanks for coming out.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone.